Hello? Hello, hello. Oh, there we go. Is everybody in? Yes, I see the doors closing. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is David Forcell, and I am president of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. I don't know what this means. Is this a left-leaning group or a right-leaning group? That's pretty funny, wasn't it? All right. Seriously, first off, before we get started, what I want to say is thank you to Bartlett Tree Experts, Scotty Too Hottie Jameson, as he's well known in Chicago, and Ricardo Barker are both here from Bartlett. Actually, Scott Jameson and Rick Barker. Would you guys stand and be recognized? Because these guys made it happen tonight. And I tend to be a sort of an informal person. I'm going to try to get it a little more formal here. This is a thrill for me, actually, to have Dr. Kuo here. For those of you who aren't terribly familiar with her work, I think you're going to be amazed. And what I love about this group tonight, seeing it, we have downtown, like, economic development people, and we have engineers, and we have landscape architects, and we have artists, and we have young people who are going to start being part of our urban naturalist team. We have naturalists. The list goes on about the remarkable diversity that green brings, right? And so it's really cool to see the mix here tonight. So let's get right to it. Ming Kuo studies the impacts of urban environments on healthy human functioning. In particular, how Greenspace supports healthy human functioning in individuals and also for communities. In 1993, she led a series of studies on the impacts of green spaces on human functioning in inner city Chicago, for which she and her collaborators received the Environmental Design Research Association's Achievement Award. Last year, a couple years ago, we had her colleague, Andrea Faber-Taylor, here. Andrea was a student of Dr. Kuo's and has documented amazing relationships between green and the lifting of ADHD symptoms in children. Dr. Kuo, her work has convincingly, at this point, linked healthy urban ecosystems to stronger, safer neighborhoods, lower crime, the reduced ADHD symptoms I mentioned, reduced aggression in people around green space, and an array of other mental health indicators. She has helped shape research agendas at a variety of places at a national level, including the USDA, the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, and the list goes on. Of the 50 most cited articles in Environment and Behavior, she is the supervising author or lead on 5 of the 50. So this is someone who has laid amazing and interesting groundwork. I've known her for her work for 20 years, amazed by it. What I will tell you, I'm going to be quiet and have her speak to this, but what I will tell you is that when we became aware of her work at KIB, we said, we must plant trees. We have to plant a lot of trees. And we have to do as much as we can to create little green spaces throughout every neighborhood we possibly can where the green space is lacking. That is how convincing the work is that she has done. I get a little philosophical sometimes. There's a gentleman named Howard Thurman, an African-American Quaker theologian, actually, who I think speaks to the world we would all wish to see, I suspect, in this room. And Dr. Kuo enables us to see that possibility. And it is this, to see a world that is built, that is friendly, to build a friendly world of friendly people under friendly skies. And that is the work we set out to do every day. I'll leave you with this. I got to meet Dr. Kuo a couple of years ago. I told her that if I were to have to choose between meeting her and meeting Bono, I would choose Bono. but that she would come in a very close second. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ming Kuo. Please give her a hand.
Well, thank you for embarrassing me, David. Hi. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for having me. I'm fighting off a cold, so I'm sorry if my voice quality is not quite there. If I'm speaking and you're not able to understand, just put your hand up and I'll say it again. All right. I'm worried I'll cough into it. All right, so what I'm speaking today on is Green for People, the essential nature of green space for urban residents. And I want to preface this by saying I'm actually going to be, I'm bringing you the latest findings from all over the world. This is not just my work. And if you know, I'll give you a whole bunch of menus, you know, and you can tell me what you're interested in. And if you choose things that I didn't do, that is completely fine with me. So it's been kind of an amazing time the last 5 years, especially in my field. In the olden days, when I first started, it was as though the frontier were just, you know, tumbleweeds, the occasional buffalo, I mean, maybe one buffalo. And that was kind of it. I could work for months, years without worrying about keeping up with the research because there was really almost nothing going on. And now, every month, there's stuff in the newspaper, and that refers me to other things, and so I can't even keep up now. So the pace of work has really accelerated, and the quality of work has really gone up. And so it's really exciting to share this stuff with you because I think you'll be amazed because I'm in the field and I'm amazed. So hopefully we'll see. All right. All right. So let's start with John Muir. There he is. Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wilderness is a necessity, and that mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as fountains of life. Fountains of life. That's very beautiful and poetic, right? And I'm sure you're here because you sense it or you have some sense that this is true. But that's basically what the research is telling us. Fountains of life, and I don't know, I feel like if you really have to leave, you've got this is the essence. This is the essence of the talk, okay? But I hope you'll stay for the details. All right, so very brief outline of what we'll be covering. We not only know what the benefits of having some kind of contact with nature are, we know what the active ingredients, or we know many active ingredients, what it is about nature that has these effects. We know in fairly good detail our physiological and our psychological response to nature. We know how this plays out in terms of how well we function and our health, physical and mental. And we know a little bit about dosage. And I'll conclude with conclusions. All right. Maybe we should start with the active ingredients. Do you have any guesses what the active ingredients might be? Trees. What about trees? Any thoughts? Shade. Okay. Cleans the air. Yes. Good. All right. Well, let's take a look. So we know this is actually a subset of the active ingredients we know about. So clearly, by cleaning the air, that's going to help with potential respiratory issues, particularly when it's hot, because respiratory issues are exacerbated during those times. There are things called phytoncides. Phytoncides are, well, phytocides, killing, they are basically antimicrobial substances. Phytoncides, when you walk into a forest and you smell pine, or what other specific essential oils have been shown to relate to health? Pine, oak, basically all the nice smells, all the smells that you go, those are the ones that have been tied to all kinds of effects on the human psyche and physiology. Boosts serotonin, it affects your immune system, so all kinds of things come from phytoncides. There's something called Microbacteria vaccae, which is in the soil. If some of you really find yourself feeling like, I need, I need to work with soil, well, this little guy may be the reason. It's a microbacterium, and it again affects serotonin. It makes you happier and smarter. And if you give rats this stuff, if you inject them with it, they run mazes faster, and they are more calm if you throw them in a pool where they think they're drowning. It's not very nice, and I apologize, but this is how we learn things in science. So basically, you've got rats that are much calmer about looking like they might drown, and they react to the situation with much more grace under pressure. Basically, they figure out what's going on, and they get themselves to the sides of the pool. They're just in better shape all around. So phytoncides, Microbacteria vaccae, just the sheer fact of diverse microbiota are helpful to us. So I don't know if you guys know what microbiota are, but if you think about biodiversity, right, having many different kinds of plants, different animals, different organisms of various kinds out in the world, when you have macrodiversity, you also tend to have microdiversity, diversity in the microscopic organisms around us. And it turns out, we have been learning, that humans are greatly dependent on this whole microbiotic world. In fact, we are now learning that, I can't remember what the stats are, but somebody here knows, the number of different microorganisms in our gut is staggering. What is it? Millions, right? And it turns out that they're not just hanging out there, you know, sort of living rent-free. They are actually essential to our functioning. And when our gut microbiota are messed up, we are messed up. And so there are all kinds of things involving, maybe I shouldn't, you guys have eaten already, right? So for instance, we are now injecting fecal matter with microbiota into people's guts, and it's having important therapeutic effects. I don't remember, I think it helps with obesity, and does anybody remember? Anyways, I don't know about ADHD. Cancer, that's the one I've read. Okay, so we need to be in contact with diverse microbiota, and that's one of the things that nature or diverse areas do for us. Another active ingredient in nature is negative air ions. Now I have to mention here, you've probably seen on the airline, what is that catalog? Sky Mall, right, Sky Mall. Sky Mall has all kinds of things to sell you that have negative air ions, and unfortunately, there's two bodies of work on negative air ions. And there's some really good stuff involving depression, very systematic, very clean, very rigorous, and then there's like a whole lot of crap. Okay, so I want to recognize that there is crap out there, and if you've run into it and you've thought, oh my God, that's terrible, that's junk science, and oh my gosh, she's bringing up the junk science, what, God, can I believe anything else she says? That's a different area. Okay, so there is some good stuff out there, peer-reviewed, very well replicated. In fact, negative air ions have been shown. You can spritz people with negative air ions, and if you have seasonal affective disorder, it has significant effects. If you have clinical levels of depression, it's actually a treatment. It can bring you, it doesn't take somebody who's clinically depressed and make them, thrilled, but it brings them out of the clinically depressed range. So they're gonna still be kind of down, but they won't be clinically depressed anymore. So that's kind of an impressive and exciting finding. And negative air ions, basically you find them where you have running water, in mountains, if you like the air near the ocean, that's one of the reasons, and forests. So 2 other active ingredients. Cooling the heat island, that's kind of obvious. So why is cooling the heat island important for human health? Well, heat stroke, heat exhaustion. It's probably not a big deal generally, but when we have these spikes in temperature, then it's important to have these cooling effects. And then finally, the sights and sounds of nature. So I'll just tell you a few examples of how we would look at this. One study involves taking people, like you would come into the lab, and I would say, okay, here, please sit in this very comfortable chair for 15 minutes, or 5 minutes, just let you to kind of calm down, let the cares of the day fall away, and then after you're good and calm, I will put you in another room with all kinds of things attached to you. We're checking your blood pressure, we're taking your blood, we're doing all kinds of things. You're all hooked up to all these wires. And then it turns out, if I show you pictures, I hand you a bunch of pictures of nature versus a bunch of pictures of, say, downtown Indianapolis where there's no nature, we can see within 5 minutes major changes in your parasympathetic nervous activity, which is, I'll explain, in your heart rate, in your blood pressure. Basically, your whole system calms down. And that's from a baseline state of calm, right? I already put you in a calm state, and I made you even calmer. So you're basically going into what we might call hypometabolic state, where you're deeply relaxed. Just 5 minutes with all these wires and just pictures. So that's the power of nature, right? Just these little pictures, you can't, no smells, no sounds. They're not huge images, they're just little pictures we're handing you. You're hooked up to these wires, and yet just 5 minutes we can see these major changes in your nervous activity. Let me explain that. You know about fight or flight? Yeah, okay, so fight or flight is the system that your body goes into when you are threatened, right? You mobilize for action. Oh my gosh, we might need to run from a bear. Let's send energy to our muscles, and I can't remember all the changes. There's many changes. But the parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. It's what turns on when you are truly safe and relaxed. And unfortunately, in modern day life, we don't spend enough time in deep parasympathetic activity. But even that kind of pathetic exposure to nature is enough to do that for you. All right, so that's one example. Another example of the sights and sounds of nature, we will take people into the forest and then put a shower curtain around them for 15 minutes and then measure their blood and their blood pressure and see what's going on. And it turns out that many of the benefits of nature you can get even inside the shower curtain in this beautiful forest. So if you didn't think that scientists were a weird bunch, I hope you now know. All right, so those are just some of the so those are just some of the active ingredients we've identified as having effects on people that might promote healthy functioning and health. What about the psyche's response? As I mentioned, I think that I think the picture with the swing really captures the deep relaxation that nature can help us achieve. We have that deep sense of relaxation, and relaxation is important. You know, it's not just nice. It is nice. It is nice, right? And oftentimes we don't achieve too much relaxation during the day. We go home, we've got, the house is a mess, the kids need this, there's all these things we forgot to do or we need to do. There's just so many things impinging on us that are kind of, we've got our to-do list that we're carrying around, and we don't fully let down, we don't fully relax. And that's important. That has really big health implications, because it turns out that actually the body is pretty good. It's not so bad for you to have the occasional peak stress moments. That's what your body is meant for. It's, you know, you're supposed to have a life. You're supposed to have a life. There's supposed to be the occasional dangers and threats, and we're built for that. We mobilize when we need to, and then afterwards we can calm down. But what if we don't do this form of deep relaxation? What happens then? If we don't, our immune system behaves accordingly. In other words, your immune system is tied to your psyche. If your psyche is saying, you know what, I got a lot of things to do, there's things to worry about, things are not all good. There are things that are a little scary out on the horizon. If you have that state going through your day and through your evening and through your weekend, then the immune system says, okay, I'm going to invest in defensive, I don't know how to put it. I'm going to make defensive investments. I'm going to work on inflammatory cytokines because those might be useful, and I'm going to reduce natural killer cells because those are less important than these immediate threats, okay? But when you're in this deep relaxation phase or state, then your immune system says, oh, okay, we're really safe. Let's invest in these long-term strengthening kinds of immune functions. So we increase our natural killer cells, which help us guard against potential cancers. We reduce inflammatory cytokines because we're not too worried about them. It really changes the profile of our immune system. So the immune system, when we're under this kind of low-level constant uproar, is a different place than when we're in this truly relaxed state. And when we get there, I'll tell you what kinds of benefits that results in. All right, so we get relaxation from the psyche, we get effortless and gentle absorption. That turns out to be incredibly important for how you function mentally. There's two good things for good cognitive functioning, okay? One is sleep, and the other one is this effortless, gentle absorption. When you can get into that state, you can basically recharge, mentally recharge. So if there's something that you do that brings you that state, like it's not just nature, let's see, knitting, quiet time with friends and family, time with pets, what else? Gardening is a good one. Prayer and meditation. But there are various activities that put you in that state. And they are all good at mentally rejuvenating you. Third and fourth, vitality and reduced fatigue. It turns out that when we go out into nature, we often come back and say, oh, I feel revitalized, and I feel like I have what it takes to do things. Well, it turns out that when we take you into the lab after inducing that state in you, we can actually show that you perform better. So I'll give you a bunch of numbers, and you have to repeat them back to me backwards. It's actually very difficult. But if I do that to you after a nature dose versus a non-nature dose, you perform systematically better. You are smarter. Awe is also tied to inflammatory cytokines. So when you go out in nature and you experience awe, well, that's not just a great feeling, it's also got physiological impacts. All right, so that's the psyche's response. Let's look at the body's response. We move from what I said is the fight or flight state to the tend and befriend state. Our immune function is boosted and shaped in very specific ways. If you look at the top picture, those are two NK cells, natural killer cells, attacking a cancer cell. So natural killer cells are kind of like the vigilantes of the immune system. You have most of your immune system, it attacks known bad guys, okay? So when you've encountered a virus or a bacterium before or some kind of disease before, your body's like, oh, I remember you. Last time you came in here, you trashed the place. So they remember it. It recognizes, oh, you, that guy, this is a bad guy. So as soon as the bad guy shows up, we check our databases and, that 4-cell guy, and we attack him, right? So that's how most of the immune system works. But there's this one part, the natural killer cells, which are the vigilantes. They don't care about what we've learned before. They just look at you to see if you look suspicious. You look suspicious. I'm going to attack you. I'm going to go over there and then expel little granules into you and explode you. That's how we work. That's how the natural killer cell works. So natural killer cells are our only protection against cancer because, why? Because cancers are our own cells. If we just were like, oh yeah, you're one of us, even though you're behaving very strangely and shuffling along and wearing a trench coat in the deep summer, I'm going to ignore that because you're one of us. Well, then cancers would just run roughshod. So it turns out that natural killer cells help us fight against cancer and viruses and many other things. And when you take a walk in the woods, a 3-day weekend in the woods, your natural killer cells are boosted 46%. And a month later, they're still at 28% above baseline. Okay, so that's a kind of an amazing finding, right? Blood glucose, DHEA, and adiponectin. When we take people on walks through the woods versus on similar walks through urban, non-green areas, and we look at what's going on inside their blood, we find that if you have high blood glucose, it goes down precipitously. In fact, a half-hour walk in the woods is better than 3 hours of bicycling on a stationary bicycle. So we know that exercise is good for blood glucose. If you have high blood glucose and you take 3 hours on the bike, it will bring it down. But half an hour in the woods of walking will bring it down more. All right, so blood glucose, DHEA, which is it's a molecule which helps protect against obesity, diabetes, and it is cardioprotective in what way? Oh, what is that called? When your blood vessels become stiff? Atherosclerosis, yes. Okay, so DHEA protects against all those. Turns out, I take you on a walk in the woods, and I can watch your DHEA levels go up. I take you on the exact same walk in an urban area, beep, nothing. DHEA just stays right where it is. All right? Adiponectin, as you might guess, adiponectin, it fights obesity and diabetes. So this may be one of the reasons for a finding I'll tell you later in just a minute. We also see cerebral relaxation. Those pictures show the difference between, no, they don't. They illustrate what the difference between a nature dose and a non-nature dose. But that's actually I didn't have a picture of the nature dose and the non-nature dose. These are the same effects elicited some other way, but that's what it would look like, right? I don't want to lie. Okay, so that's the body's response. Are you with me? Are you amazed? Isn't this crazy? Yeah. It's crazy, right? All right, so now let's look at what happens. Let's get out of the woods. Let's get out of the woods now and look at everyday life. What if we start to compare people who have greener neighborhoods versus non-green neighborhoods? Okay, less green neighborhoods. So now we're in civilization, all right? And for everything I say to you, I promise we have controlled for differences in income. Because it's just like, if I came here and I said, oh, you know what? Rich people with green neighborhoods are doing so much better on all these different ways than poor people with not green neighborhoods. You'd be like, oh yeah, it's the trees, right? You'd kick me out. So I don't know, we don't bother, we don't care about that. The finding that rich green versus poor not green are different. We're totally not interested in that. In fact, it's annoying, okay? So in all the comparisons I'm gonna give you, this is looking at people of the same income, right, in a green versus a not green situation, okay? So if you take people, Australians in fact, if you take Australians and look at the ones in the greener neighborhoods and you control for income, you take into account income, you find that the people who have the greener neighborhoods are systematically less likely to have sleep disorders or sleep disturbances on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis. What is the health outcome of living a life where you get good sleep on a regular basis versus not? Right? That's a big deal. Furthermore, we find that people are kinder and gentler if they live in greener areas. So this is the work in Chicago Public Housing. We compare people who live in architecturally identical buildings. They've been randomly assigned. Oh, this person ended up in a building with some greenery outside. This person ended up in a building, looks just the same except for it's just asphalt outside. Well, it turns out that when we compare those folks, we ask them, how do you handle your conflicts with your partner or your little kid? How do you handle it? Does it go well? How often do you do things that you kind of regret? The people in the greener buildings say, yeah, I could do better, but I'm doing okay. I haven't done, when they describe what things they've done and how often they've done them, the whole pattern is better than the people who are living in the less green buildings. And of course, that's self-report, right? So when we had those findings, we're like, oh, I don't know, maybe that's just green buildings make people happier, gives them some kind of lens, and they look at the past and they just remember the good things. Who knows, right? But to check on this, we looked at Chicago police crime data. Same effect. Violent crimes more frequent in the barren buildings. 2 years of violent crimes. That work has actually been replicated in a whole series of studies. So I did that in Chicago Public Housing, but it's been done since in both poor and non-poor contexts. So more aggression, more violence where there's less greenery around, no matter how wealthy you are. So we are kinder and gentler when we have greener surroundings, greener residential surroundings. We are better able to focus. We are less impulsive. So it turns out, maybe some of you have discovered this, that at the end of the day, we are less able to resist unfortunate impulses. If we've had a long and tiring day, at the end of the day, if your spouse chooses that moment to bring something up, you might say something you would regret. In fact, you would much more likely to say it then than if they brought it up at the beginning of Saturday morning after you've had a nice sleep in, right? So this capacity to resist unhelpful impulses is actually systematically related to contact with nature. And in fact, I can take you into the lab and show you slides of green things or slides of other green things, not green things. And then, for instance, I could leave donuts out in front of you and watch how many you take. Or what else? I can give you those. Do you remember those pictures where you'd have two pictures and they'd be different in very subtle ways? These are little kid magazines. It turns out that if you show adults these things and you say, okay, as soon as you're convinced that these things are the same, press this button. And people, because they look pretty similar, you're like, oh yeah, right? No nature? Oh yeah, that's the same. Oh, that's the same. Ah, that's the same. Nature? No, okay, there's a problem there. Okay, that one's the same. So there's this stop, look, and listen function that gets built in that we are built to do. We have this capacity, but it gets fatigued. And so if we're having a life where that capacity is fatigued and we don't get it restored through sleep or through knitting or through nature, then we are walking around more reactive, more impulsive, more likely to express that unfortunate thought that we had when our landlord said something to us, or more likely to say something unhelpful when our boss says something to us. Those impulses, the impulse to eat the extra donut, to have another cigarette, those impulses we can normally resist if we have this capacity. But some of the times we get tired, and when we do, nature can help restore that capacity. Kind of important, right? All right, I'm just gonna talk a little bit in here. Maybe I'll just make you choose. All right. When we compare people having a greener life versus a less green life, controlled for income, we see better functioning in the greener areas. We see more social connection, less loneliness, greater strength of sense of community, more people reporting that they help each other, that they and their neighbors help each other, more people reporting that they even know each other's neighbors, greater mental health, just work on depression, anxiety disorder. Oh, I think I should tell you about this. All right, so let's just take the anxiety disorder. No, the depression findings, the effect on this is huge. Okay, so you look at people in the greenest areas of the UK versus, no, sorry. This is the Netherlands. We're in the Netherlands, 350,000 people. They have centralized healthcare, and so they have everyone's medical records, right? And so you can just draw little circles around each person's house and say, okay, within 1 kilometer radius, about half a mile, of this person's house, there's this many pixels of green from a satellite photo. And this person only has this many pixels of green. So we compare people with more and fewer pixels of green around their house. And when we do, the people in the greenest areas are 25% less likely to have clinical depression. So for every 3 people who have clinical depression, by greening your world, you are preventing 1 other person from having depression. That's crazy, right? So depression has huge effects. Anxiety disorders have huge effects. Somebody in London has looked at, they looked at pharmacies. So this pharmacy's in this neighborhood, this pharmacy's in this neighborhood, this pharmacy's in this neighborhood. This neighborhood is relatively green. Okay, let's go find an equally green neighborhood that's the same income, different greenness, and compare the pharmacies in the number of mood medications that they prescribe. Clear large differences in the prescription of mood medications, right? So we're seeing what are the costs, what are the implications of that for the quality of these folks' lives, for what the National Health Service is spending on these medications, on how functional these folks are in their work and as parents and as spouses. What are the ramifications of these findings? I would contend it's transformative. So when we green places, we are not just, putting a little, as they say, parsley around the pig. We are changing the world. We are changing the world to make it a better habitat for humans. And then when we do so, we get better humans. All right, that's mental health. Physical health, what can I say? This study in the Netherlands, 345,000, they looked at all their medical diagnoses. If we categorize medical diagnoses into the 25 major clumps of diagnoses, 18 of them are better in greener areas. Okay, so it's not everything, sorry, can't fix everything, but just to give you some idea what these include, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular health. How many of you have high blood pressure or know someone with high blood pressure? How many have had a heart attack or know someone who's had a heart attack or stroke? Very common, almost normal. Yes? Well, if you live in a greener area, that is much less likely to have happened to you. Okay? Cancer, infectious diseases, healing from surgery is better in a greener setting. Birth outcomes, birth weight, and what they call small for gestation, which is given how long you've been in the pot, you are bigger. Respiratory disease, backaches. Anybody have back or shoulder or arm aches that they've ever seen the doctor for? Those are less common in greener areas. I like the category MUPS, medically unexplained physical symptoms. Those are less common. So when we have no idea what's going on with you, somehow there's less of that problem in greener areas. All right? And then finally, there's a bunch of studies now that have looked at mortality rates. I'll just tell you what. I'll tell you two. In the UK, they looked at 40 million people's mortality records. They wanted to look at just folks who are pre-retirement. Okay, so it's children to adults. What are the mortality rates in these folks? And they controlled for income, and they find an enormous difference in mortality rates, rich and poor, for green versus not green. Furthermore, this is kind of important. And I've never figured out how to explain it in a simple way, so just bear with me and maybe we can figure this out together. All over the world, when you look at people who are wealthier versus people who are less wealthy, there is a difference in mortality rates. Rich people die at a slower rate than poor people. Poor people die at a good clip. In fact, here in the US, the differences can be decades. Life expectancy of a poor person in Washington, D.C. can be 2 decades less than someone who lives a subway stop away in Washington, D.C. Okay, so that disparity, that difference, that unnecessary mortality is cut in half when you look at just people who are all living in the greenest areas. Did that make sense? So I take somebody who's poor and who, quote unquote, should die sooner, but I put them in a green area, and suddenly half of that difference has disappeared. Okay, so what I'm hoping this is drawing for you is a picture of a world that ought to be green. It ought to be green. And it ought to be green, in some ways, it ought to be green even more so for the folks who are poor. Because if we think about the burden of mortality and morbidity, diseases in poor areas, the burden of people not functioning well, or the burden of people following their impulses more than they should, unfortunate impulses in a dangerous and fast-changing environment. If all we have to do to make a dent in that is green those places, it's kind of crazy for us not to, because the societal costs, in addition, let's say you're just totally heartless and, selfish, you don't care about people who are living in poor neighborhoods. Well, surely you do care if they go to the emergency room for medical care because they have more problems, and then you have a higher tax burden, right? So even aside from just human decency and not wanting people to die before they have to, there's a huge societal cost to that kind of decision, all right? So, a little bit about dosage, and then I'll stop. Almost all forms of nature, as far as we can tell, seem to help. Prairie, forest, mountain, lake. The only thing that has been kind of a dud in the research is indoor plants. I don't know why. Sometimes the indoor plants show an effect, sometimes they don't. Oddly, we get better effects, more consistent effects from pictures of nature or even impressionist landscape paintings than we do for the, one or two indoor plants. I don't know why, I'm just telling you that that's what we found. Every bit helps. So if you can plant a single tree, if you don't have money for 5 trees and you can plant one, that one tree makes a difference. 5 will do more. 5 will do more. Every bit helps. And in fact, we have yet to find the amount beyond which adding more doesn't help. I suspect if we did some work in Seattle, we could probably figure that out, but we haven't done that much work in Seattle, and so far, the greener, the better. And finally, must be present to win. So, if you live in an area that's got its green commutes and its not green commutes, but you take the not green commute because it's a little faster, then you are not getting that dose. And you are not showing that dose. You're not showing the effects of that dose. If you have a window that opens out onto a green area and your desk and chair face the other way, it turns out that people have actually run this study. People have put plants in the back of classrooms and found that they didn't have any effect on the kids in the classroom. I'm not sure why they thought it would have an effect, but at any rate, take the lesson. All right, so you must be present to win. It doesn't matter if it's near you if you don't experience it. Although the shower curtain in the woods thing does work, right? But they're present. I would say that they're in the woods, and maybe they're not seeing it, but they're definitely there, right? They're breathing the air, and they're taking in the microbacteria vaccae from the soil, et cetera, et cetera. So they are present, and they are winning, right? So let's stop with some conclusions. First of all, Muir was more right than he could have ever guessed, right? Nature deficit disorder is real. It's real, it's pervasive, it has a staggering range of effects. Vitamin G acts like a water-soluble vitamin. So you know that we have the fat-soluble vitamins and the water-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins, can kind of like take a big dose. What is it? K is one of them, isn't it? Right? So you just get a bunch of K, and then as long as you haven't poisoned yourself, you can kind of live off of that vitamin K for a long time. On the other hand, we have these vitamins that are water-soluble. Use it or lose it, right? Or use it and it's gone shortly thereafter. So you kind of need regular doses, right? You can't go to Yosemite and, I'm done for the year. right? You actually need it in your life. And I would say that given the power of the effects, it would be really upsetting to me if what you took away from this was this personal responsibility idea. Oh, I have to go out and, oh my gosh, I have to eat right, I have to make sure I get enough exercise every day, I have to, have my 20-minute time with my spouse to keep our relationship well. All these shoulds. I don't really want that. I don't really want to add another should to your lives. But I do want to add a should to our understanding of Indianapolis and the world. Indianapolis should be green. It's not just a matter of, oh, you make time between your this and your that thing to go out and get a green dose. That doesn't really make sense. We have to put green around people's homes and workplaces and schools so that they just imbibe it, almost like sneaking vegetables into lasagna or into smoothies, right? You're like, oh, here, have this, Johnny. It's yummy. You have to get it into their lives, and it doesn't matter if they know about it or if they care, if they're noticing it. It just has to be part of their experience. All right, so vitamin G acts like a water-soluble vitamin, and we should find every opportunity to get it into people. And finally, greening is preventive public health. As you probably are well aware, every public health intervention we've ever had, sewers, clean water, et cetera, has been staggeringly cost-effective. Staggeringly cost-effective. And I would argue that we haven't done public health greening interventions in any kind of systematic way. But I would say everything in the evidence points to having a similar effect. And so I hope you will help me argue for greening as our next big public health intervention. Thank you.
All right. So there's like 10 or 15 minutes where we can ask Dr. Kuo some questions. As we begin to think, maybe I'll ask one. And we have little microphones. And the microphones matter because we're recording all this stuff. So I just want to make sure that we have to use those. My question is about here in core neighborhoods in Indianapolis, there are a lot of people in this room working very hard. I'm not using the microphone. It's just not a smart man, am I? Okay, so there are a lot of people, even in this room, working on improving neighborhoods. Housing, commercial revitalization, more police on the streets. How would you suggest we begin to think about policy or funding around greening when there are all these other pressures and more obvious responses to challenges in lower income neighborhoods?
Yikes. Well, I'm a scientist. My job is just to find out what the effects are. And I've only gotten to the point where I'm kind of an advocate because I feel like, well, gee, with all these effects, maybe we ought to use this. I guess I'm going to kind of blather for a little bit. When I spoke to the Chicago City Council at one point, and there were reporters there, and they came up to me afterwards, and they said, so, are you saying we should stop spending money on the police and stop crime by planting trees? No, why would I? No. So I don't necessarily think you should rob Peter to pay Paul here. But I guess I would say that it looks like it's pretty stupid to spend your entire budget, your crime-fighting budget, on police. Because what does that investment do? it means that you have for the most part, it means that you have a more responsive system for dealing with crime when it happens. Why not prevent it? So much nicer, right? One kid killed, another kid traumatized, multiple kids traumatized for life, unable to eat well or sleep well or concentrate on their studies afterwards. One incidence of violence is so costly, so costly. And to respond well to it afterwards is good, but I would say, you know, that's the thing. It's the difference between public health and medicine, right? Yes, it's great to be able to rush over after someone's gone off the cliff and stitch them back together. But let's reduce the number of people going off over the cliff. And it's not that expensive. Let me give you a statistic. A friend of mine did this in Toronto. They looked at street trees. It turns out that by planting 10 trees on a street, you are improving health. I can't remember which health measures. I think it might have been cardiovascular. The same as giving everyone on that street $10,000 more a year in income, or I can't remember. I think you have to make them 2 years younger. So if you had the magic wand, you go ding, you know, everybody's 2 years younger, that's the same effect as 10 street trees. So I think economically the return on investment's really good. I guess one thing I want to invite you to do is ask me about any concerns that you have, goals you have for Indianapolis. What would you like to see more of or less of? And if there's any research out there on trees and your outcome, I can tell you.
I actually had a question. I mean, this is fascinating body of work developing all over the world. But how did you personally get interested in this type of work? Because you said you were moving in this direction when there was very little research out there. How did you move in this direction?
It's completely an accident. I was interested in the dark side of the physical environment. I was interested in what is it about inner cities that seems to contribute to, or I believed it contributed to, maladaptive behaviors. And so that's what I wanted to study, but I had this advisor who was this giant expert in the benefits of trees on people's psychologies. And then the Forest Service came out with a big call for proposals saying, study the effects of trees in underserved populations. And I thought, I'll study, this is my setting, right? I'll study all my variables and I'll throw in the trees as, you know, that's what they asked for. I'll include the trees as part of my study, and then I'll know all of this. And it turned out the trees were the thing that really made the big differences. And so I've just been dragged by the data through this career to study this. Does that answer your question?
Okay, can I? Yeah, I had a question about the physical health and mental health. You presented almost like this could be an intervention for somebody suffering from one of these illnesses, and I'm wondering if there have been placebo-controlled studies on that as a treatment effect.
Well, okay, no, I don't. What can I say? So let's take depression. There are different kinds of effects. So if you compare people who live in greener, less green areas, you have different rates of prevalence. You also have differences in symptomatology. So both in the general population and in depressed people, you say, okay, tell me how bad, you know, there's the Beck's depression scale. I feel there's no meaning in life, and I'm, you know, blah, blah, blah. People endorse the bad things more strongly if they live in greener less green areas. So the symptoms, whether you're diagnosed or not, are less. I don't know what to say about placebo. I mean, I don't think any of those people believe that their neighborhood has anything to do with. I think placebo has to do with, placebos work when you believe you're taking something which might help. And I don't think any of us understand, well, except me. I don't think any of us understand our neighborhoods as having major impacts on whether we are depressed or not. I mean, especially because we're surrounded by other people who maybe are not depressed, or they are, but they're on meds and we don't know it, right? So it feels like this individual thing. Oh, I'm wired this way, or I sustain certain kinds of traumas. So I don't think the placebo argument really makes sense. But I guess I would say we do know through lab work that if I show you pretty pictures of nature, you report having your mood considerably lightened afterwards. And so maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe just putting people in surroundings that are pretty, that are nice. Maybe that actually chips away at depression. I don't know. I mean, certainly there's both findings, right? There's the lab work where we systematically and in a very rigorous way show people pretty pictures or not pretty pictures and test how the effects are. And then we also have this real world stuff where we look at people in these neighborhoods versus those neighborhoods. Yeah, I think that's all I can say.
Are there any architectural firms nationally that are designing schools, educational environments, that trees are first and institution is second?
I can't imagine, no. I mean, maybe. I will tell you, one of the slides I didn't include is this, it's the highest rating LEED building school, and it's quite pretty, but it's a schoolyard, and there's not a single living thing in there. And it's an award-winning, it's what the firm shows everybody. Look what we did. We created this school that looks like a prison yard. There's no trees, there's no dirt, there's no ivy, there's no plants, no flowers, nothing. It's just pristine, beautiful brickwork, So this idea we have that greenery is parsley around the pig goes pretty deep. And whenever we don't have enough money, we say, oh, let's keep the pig, throw out the parsley. It makes sense, right? If it is just parsley, you shouldn't spend money on it. You shouldn't. But it's not. That's what we're finding.
I would just answer this gentleman's question here. I'm from Chicago, and there is a school outside of Chicago, Grays Lake, Illinois, called the Prairie Crossing Charter School. It's a K-8 school built in a sustainable community where their entire program is environmentally based, and those students have to spend 4 hours a day outside unless it's 20 degrees or colder. So every day of the year, they are outside learning whatever their curriculum is.
Yes.
So Prairie Charter Crossing School, look it up. It's an amazing school.
Right, so there are lots of schools and even whole educational systems like Norway. They have outdoor kindergartens, where the kids have knives and play with fire. And, it's very different. But they do that as a matter of course. But architecture, I would say, has not, especially school architecture, has not figured this out.
Two more questions.
Okay.
Resources out there for us to find out more about what you found out that you shared with other people?
Well, I handed out some flyers.
We'll have handouts when people leave that you can pick up, and
Okay,
we'll have more information on our website.
And then there are a couple, I sent the links out. Did you? Okay, so you've received links, but if you want to look it up, there's kind of it's from 2010 now, so it doesn't have all the latest fabulous stuff. But if you look up KUO Parks NRPA, that will take you to a whole monograph of findings. And I didn't even mention the economic stuff. There's economic benefits.
So green is a very broad term. What variables in the future what are you really excited to be exploring more in the next couple of years in terms of individual variables? And then also, we've reached a point where in DC people are literally prescribing parks.
Right.
So not just in a laboratory, but I guess that would be manipulative experimentation. And what excites you about that as well?
Well, Robert Zara and I are actually talking about documenting any health benefits, so we'd like to do that if you have any money just to fund that. I would like to do that. I'm doing some work in Baltimore inner city neighborhoods to see if those immune functioning findings that I told you about, the 3-day weekend in Japan, if we can get those from little tiny vest pocket neighborhood green spaces, because those are doable, right? There are these gaps in the urban fabric where buildings have been taken down. If we green those little tiny pockets, especially if we use volunteer labor and we design it with the help of the community and they feel they have a sense of ownership, does visiting those on a regular basis have documentable health outcomes? So that's one thing I'm doing. I'm also looking at academic achievement school test scores in Chicago. We have 10 years of test scores for 1.7 million scores. And so far, so good. It looks amazing.
One more question. I know we can stay all night, but we want to respect your schedules. Who's like most eager? Come on.
Ah.
Oh, I see a hand way in the back there.
I'm also happy to stay if you want to come up and have a question.
With all the knowledge you have, how do you implement what you've learned into your own life, and how do you incorporate that into your family life?
That's really good. My son is completely tied to his phone. I tried, but I really haven't done very well. Yeah, I'm sure. I guess, but I can say that I live in a green neighborhood, and I have taken to doing something which looks really quite ridiculous. I walk home, and I keep my chin up, and I travel mentally through that river of trees all the way home. And I look like a complete, I don't know what, you know. But, you know, I'm busy. And I do that. I try to get out on the weekends, try to have vacations in green places. That's kind of it.
How about one more hand for Dr. Quo? She was gracious to say if you have a question or two, come see her. And otherwise, have a green life. Figure out a way. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.